Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
We are pleased to bring you this special series on Unity Online Radio. To learn about other series, go to unityonlineradio.org and click on Special Series.
Welcome to a special series, The Three Faces of God, with co-hosts Karen Kelly and Reverend Ellen Davenport, author of The Five Principles. They'll be exploring the different aspects of the divine that show up in world religions and in unity. No matter what you think about God now, stay tuned for new ideas on The Three Faces of God.
Welcome to the fourth show of our series. Let's see. It's the fourth show of a 6-part series on the three faces of God. It's a lot
and there's
of
two
math
of us
for the first
talking
sentence.
to one person.
That's right. Yeah, okay. I'm Ellen Davenport. I'm here with my co-host Karen Kelly. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Ellen.
This series has gone so fast, we've only got 2 more shows after today. Incidentally, if you all listeners have missed any of our shows, they are right here on Unity Online Radio. There's a tab called Special Series, and that's where you will find the Three Faces of God. You can listen online anytime. You can download them and take them with you. And personally, I think you should go back and start at the beginning. If you haven't already, it's kind of like Downton Abbey. You know, you need to get the whole season from the beginning. So I know you're especially excited about our guest today, Karen.
Oh, you know I am, Ellen. Our guest today, listeners, is Reverend Robert Brumet. He teaches at the Unity Institute and Seminary, and he was the one who introduced us in the first place to Ken Wilber's Integral Spirituality and the Three Faces of God. He's the one who got me all excited about this. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning, Karen. It's good to be here.
Actually, good afternoon.
Yeah.
So,
people ask us a lot if we are together in a room for these shows. Robert's joining us today from our Unity FM studios at Unity Village outside Kansas City, Missouri. Karen's in the Chicago suburbs, talking from her home office overlooking, majestic oak trees and a beautiful little lake. I love Karen's house. Yep. And I am here in Wimberley, Texas, in the hill country outside of Austin. All brought together for you by our genius engineer, Jeff Comfort.
Yay.
So now that you can picture us scattered in all these different places, Karen, you were telling us about our guest.
Yes, indeed. Well, Robert is an ordained Unity minister and an accomplished teacher for over 24 years. As a matter of fact, happy 24th anniversary, June 12th, Robert.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You bet. And he's earned quite a reputation for being the professor who teaches really deep, thought-provoking classes like spiritual development and self-awareness, the Enneagram, meditation, pastoral counseling, and now on top of that, Ken Wilber's Integral Spirituality. He's also the prolific author of a number of books, including The Quest for Wholeness, Finding Yourself in Transition, and Birthing a Greater Reality. And today we'll be talking a lot about what he's written in his brand new book called Living Originally, 10 Spiritual Practices to Transform Your Life. And if all that's not enough, he also conducts very intense spiritual retreats several times each year. They're always open to Unity folks and to others in the community. And you're just coming back from a really successful retreat this weekend, aren't you, Robert? I heard there were over 90 people in this one.
We are. Wow. We just had a great time, and we had people from British Columbia and from the UK and from all over the United States, and they were very receptive and very kind to me, so I enjoyed the whole thing.
Oh, that's great. That's
wow,
great.
You have an international audience. So, Robert, you were the one who turned Karen on to Ken Wilber and the Three Faces of God, and she hasn't stopped talking about it since then. And you know she got so inspired she wrote an article about it earlier this year for Unity magazine. She got me excited about doing this special series with her. And I want to try to catch up because you were teaching at Unity Institute when I was there in ministerial school, but that was 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you weren't teaching the three faces then. I feel like I've missed something. So could you just hit the high points? What are the three faces of God? And why is it useful to think of the divine this way?
Right. Yeah. First of all, I want to credit Ken Wilber with this perspective because it's not mine. It's his. It's my understanding of his understanding of it. And the three faces of God really relate to how we as human beings relate to anything, not just to God, but to anything at all. Anything we experience, it's either in third person, it's an it, we talk about it, we think about it as an objective reality apart from us, or it's in the second person, it's a you, we talk to it, we relate to it. And most of us do that with human beings, and a few of us do it with our pets and maybe even our plants. But for the most part, second person is a very personal one-on-one type relationship where there's a interaction and communication between the two of us, which is not true in a third-person relationship. And then first person, of course, is the self. It's in fact, it's really not a relationship in a sense because it's who is speaking, it's who is thinking, it's me in the deepest sense of the self. That's the first person.
Well, Ken Wilber tells us that each of these perspectives is important and true, right, Robert? But it's only a part of the truth of God and our relationship about and to and as God. Do you think that we need all three of these understandings to experience a balanced life, balanced spiritual life? And if so, why do you think so?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, that's the way we relate to everything as human beings. I mean, it's this whole concept is really not at all about God, or it's not specifically about God, but it's about how we relate to our sense of reality. It's how we as human beings structure reality. And so when we relate to God through the lenses that are available to us. And those are the lenses that are available to us as human beings, third person, second person, and first person. And to really know something, to really understand something, I believe we need to relate to it in all three ways. That ultimately, we talk about it, then we talk with it, and then ultimately it is myself.
You mentioned, I remember, that there's some dangers, there's some pitfalls of being unbalanced. Like if we have too much first face, if we live too much in the first face, I think you called it the ego inflator. And I think the second face you said was the ego deflator. Can you talk a little bit about what happens if we don't balance ourselves, other than the fact that it's our natural way to do it? There are some dangers and some pitfalls if we don't express in all three ways.
Yeah, that's a very good point because, for example, if I see God only in the first person, then there's a tendency to identify God with the ego, and the ego becomes inflated. And so when we talk about God in first person, it's not me, the personality that I'm talking about, but it's the intelligence that knows. It's the love that cares. That's beyond and behind all of it. Personality is just the covering, just the expression of it.
Is that the same as in your new book that you refer to as our true self?
Yes, exactly. Okay. The authentic self, the true self.
Okay.
And it's really the ultimately one with the origin of all life, and this is the particular way that we are expressions of it. It's almost You could almost think of it as a light that is refracted through a prism, and it has many, many, many different rays, and each of us is a different ray of that particular one light. And
you're talking about third face, right? God as all that is. The third face?
Well, not necessarily, because when I experience God in the first person, I experience myself as being an integral part of that of the source of all that is.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I am a beam of sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then,
or as Eric, I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. As Eric Butterworth wrote in Discover the Power, you're kind of saying I'm a fully functional drop in the ocean, but I'm not the whole ocean, but I'm reflecting exactly what the ocean is made of, what the God force is made of.
Exactly. And he uses the metaphor also of being a wave on the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
The wave is the activity of God, and that's what each of us is a wave. Sometimes we're a ripple, sometimes we're a tidal wave, but we're all waves. We're all activity of God, and mm-hmm. when we realize that as coming from within self, or being the essence of what we are, that's the first person. That's God in the first person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then God in the second person is when God is the beloved, as it's often used in some Christian language and some Sufi language. God is the friend. God is someone we talk to, we listen to, we talk with, and God becomes a very personal companion to us in this regard.
Mm-hmm.
And then God in the third person is the one that we're all quite familiar with. It's the God of theology, where we talk about God in a third person sense, that God has certain attributes. And when I experience the wonder of all creation, for example, mm-hmm. I'm talking about the goodness of God and the greatness of God, and that's God in the third person.
I think that Wilbur also called him the great web of life, and God as all that is.
Yeah,
is that
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That's third person, because it's outside of me, it's around me, but it's not something I'm relating to directly.
Mm-hmm. That's the caveat for the spiritual, not religious, that are only relating. They say, well, I find my God in nature, which certainly is true, but it's not the entire truth. And I remember you pointing out, see if I get this right, that if the downside of just focusing on the third face is that we don't get the advantages of doing the inside work or having the relationship with the personal face of God.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. We can become very interested in the third person aspect, but there's no relationship there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if we really love someone or something, why, we want to relate to him or her.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. It's been interesting for us to get feedback from our listeners. We have a Three Faces Facebook page, and they send us emails too. They're really grateful to have these three distinctions about God, because it helps them understand how they've been thinking about God and where they've been struggling with ideas about God.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like nearly everyone struggles with at least one of these three faces, including me. For me, it's the second face of God. It's that relationship mm-hmm. presents challenges for me, partly because I thought it was hammered into me by Unity that any kind of relationship with God places God outside of you, and God is not other. God is within. But then I also have some of that baggage, having been beaten up by a God that is wrathful and judgmental and is watching me, and I'm a sinner. Karen, on the other hand, had a different experience. You liked God, and he liked you.
Yeah, and I grew up with the always loving, always forgiving God, more like the Abba to whom Jesus spoke to. And I learned that as a human, I, of course, have a tendency to fall away from God. That's how we defined original sin in the Lutheran Church. And to make poor choices, but that God always loves me and always would forgive me if I ask. So when I came into Unity, I hadn't really even heard about the first face of God, the divine within. In fact, it probably would have been considered very egotistical and maybe even heretical to claim that I am God in my old faith. But my issues, Robert, are about how to get past just the intellectual understanding of the divine within and to learn how to experience myself as God and believe it from, I think you called it the inside out. And I want to know how to make this understanding real for me so that it becomes the truth of my life and that I act and I live from that knowing. That's why I'm so gosh darn excited that you're with us today, Robert, because your whole new book, Living Originally, is written to help us learn to do just that, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And if we're talking about experiencing God in the first person, it's tricky because the minute we think about it, we're putting God in the third person. You see that, because the God is the eye of the eye. It's the self of the self. It is the Meister Eckhart, the Catholic mystic, said that God is closer to me than I am. So the minute we even conceptualize or verbalize God in the first person, we're in a sense no longer in the first person. That's the tricky part of it. So God in the first person is really can be experienced. In fact, that may be the only way we can really know God in the first person is through direct experience. And the minute we start to conceptualize it or verbalize it, why, in a sense, we're leaving it.
I think you said that you wrote the book also because although you'd read a lot of books about the evolution of consciousness and personal transformation and development through the years, they had never seen a book tying them together and bringing tools to actually make our spiritual life and growth and practice a reality. Did you want to mention a few things about that?
Yes, I in my previous book, Birthing a Greater Reality, I talk a lot about the theory and the principles of evolution and talk a little bit about the how to do it in a more abstract sense. But this particular book is talking about how to do it in a very practical, moment-by-moment sense. So I think the two of the books together really form a nice complement to one another.
I want to hear more about how to practice this and how to have that experience. But first, we've got to take a break. When we return, we'll be asking Robert about practices we can use to help us experience the divine in all three faces of God. Wow. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Unity Online Radio is bringing the message of unity to tens of thousands of spiritual seekers around the world. If you have been served by this programming, we invite you to support it by visiting www.unity.fm and clicking on Donate Now. Thank you for your support.
Hi, this is Ellen Davenport. The 5 Principles was my first book, and here's what I've learned as an author. It's nice to sell a lot of books, but it's truly gratifying to know the book is being read, used, and studied in churches and small groups in the U.S. and beyond. And I get a real kick out of hearing that someone gave the 5 Principles to friends who aren't in Unity. Because the 5 Principles are universal spiritual laws. They operate in everyone's life, whether they know it or not. They've been discovered and rediscovered by spiritual masters for thousands of years. God is all there is. We are expressions of God. We create our experience with the power of our thoughts. We align ourselves with the well-being of the universe through prayer and meditation. And we live the truth we know every day in every decision. Just 5 principles. They cover it all. Buy the book at unity.org.
Oprah Winfrey says that Eric Butterworth's book, Discover the Power Within You, changed her perspective on life and religion. Maya Angelou quotes Emily Cady's Lessons in Truth as she recalls her own spiritual awakening. What do these books have in common? They share Unity's classic teachings. Join Reverend Laura Beth Gilbreth, Minister of Unity Transformation, Thursdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, for Hooked on Classics, exploring Unity's classic teachings. Follow along and contribute your thoughts, questions, and ideas as we examine these foundational teachings through the works of Unity authors past and present. Hooked on Classics, exploring Unity's classic teachings, only on Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
You're listening to The Three Faces of God, a special series with co-hosts Karen Kelly and Reverend Ellen Davenport. Join the discussion on Facebook and submit questions for upcoming shows. Now, back to The Three Faces of God.
We are back with The Three Faces. We're deep in conversation with Robert Brumet, who is a Unity minister and a professor at Unity Seminary. He's talking about his new book. The whole title is Living Originally, 10 Spiritual Practices to Transform Your Life. And it fits perfectly with practicing the three faces of God. But, Robert, what do you mean by living originally?
Well, it means living from our origin. And the origin, of course, we've been talking about, the origin is the origin of all life. It's God itself. And living originally is living consciously from this source. All living things, of course, are living from this source. Everything that's alive is animated by the one life. But there are varying degrees of awareness of this one life. And most of us, human beings, as well as most animals, are only marginally or fractionally aware of that source. So to live originally is to become more fully and more completely aware of the source of who and what our life really is.
So if we're living more according to the conditions that we are exposed to in our life, you mentioned that would be sort of living from our false self. Can you talk a little bit about our true self versus our false self?
Sure. As soon as we're born, we're subject to conditioning. We're conditioned by our parents, particularly our mother when we're very young, but our parents and our family, our culture, everything that happens to us, we are conditioned by it. And out of that conditioning, particularly our family conditioning, we develop a sense of self. We develop a sense of me that's partially conscious, but probably 99% unconscious. And most of us live out that conditioning without even realizing that's what's going on. And so who we think we are, I should say, is really a manufactured self, a conditioned self. So to live originally is to see this conditioning and to release it and to live more directly and more fully through the source itself, the origin itself. So
is that what you call inside out?
I would say yes, because one of the aspects of the conditioned self is that we are focused upon conditions. we, our whole life is about getting it right, about getting enough or getting it right, getting people to like us, getting enough money, getting enough comfort, whatever it might be, enough power, enough knowledge, and so on and so forth. That's all the conditioned self that's driven by that. And the original self is free from that. It just lives. It is what it is. It's not bound by the past. It's living fully in the present moment in the deepest sense of the word. Gotcha.
Well, you had mentioned that in order for us to do this, to live in that truth of who we are, requires a shift in consciousness. And so I wanted to ask you, if we do shift our consciousness, does living originally mean the same thing as living and experiencing the first face of God consciousness, knowing the divine within? And if we do that, if that is true, then what are some of the benefits we'll see for ourselves and the world if we do this?
Well, certainly living originally does mean living from the first person aspect of God, but it can also include the second and third persons, because once again, to be a whole human being and to really experience the fullness of what the divine is, it's important to live out all of that. That God is the breath within the breath, as Kabir says. And yet at the same time, God can be the beloved, as Rumi refers very often in his poetry as God is the beloved, and how we yearn for the beloved the way a lover yearns for his or her partner, that same kind of deep, heartfelt yearning. And also God in the third person, in the sense that we are interested in God in the expression of nature and the allness of the universe and so on and so forth. So I think living originally includes all three faces.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and also in regard to the benefit, the benefit is that this is what we all want the most. This is ultimately, I don't think it's too far to say that this is really the only thing we want. And everything else is simply a disguised version of this one desire that we have, and that is to be the fullness of God in each moment.
That's important. That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. You mentioned that when we're living from the inside out in the truth self, that it's likely that we will demonstrate genuine compassion to each other, that we will be more sensitive to the well-being of others and less centered on what happens to ourselves in our own life. That it is a place of genuine compassion.
Yes. Yeah, that's a natural consequence of realizing our connection with the origin, because we see that we're just one wave on the ocean, and there are many other waves on the ocean, but we're all the ocean, just moving about. And so there's there isn't the sense of that's not my problem if it's your problem. There's just a natural sense of caring. And most of us experience that with our family members, with our children. It's quite natural to feel that with our children, but for the most part, we don't go too much beyond our immediate family or maybe our closest friends in that feeling. So we all know what that's like. To care for someone as much as we care for ourselves. But it's just, for most of us, that's very limited. It's limited to just a few individuals rather than to all of life.
Okay. So I personally love this because this is answering my needs. Your book and our conversation is helping my needs regarding the first phase. So, but I wanted to shift a little bit and say that you tell us to get to the point where we know our truth and live this consciousness takes disciplined practice. In fact, you give us 10 practices in your book to help us begin. Do we have to learn how to do them all well before we can become enlightened and can live as God in expression or live as the divine, like the first face of God describes? Do we have to do them perfectly?
Well, I don't know if there is a perfectly, and that's something that I point out in the book itself, that spiritual practice is about cultivating an intention. And so the intention, for example, the first practice is awareness, self-awareness. Mm-hmm. So we create the intention to be present to our experiences in each moment, but obviously it's very unlikely that anybody's going to be 100% aware of our experience 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. So we don't set that up as an expectation or a goal, but that's the direction in which we move. So
we forgive ourselves quite a bit in the process.
Well, if necessary, but there's really no forgiveness necessary because it's like we know what our intention is and we just keep moving in that direction. Mm-hmm. The metaphor I sometimes use is it's like having the GPS guidance system in your car or in your phone. You know that the GPS tells you to go one direction, but if you go a different direction, it doesn't need to forgive you. It just tells you how you need to get back on track.
I like that.
and so it's always moving you towards your goal. And it's up to you how long you want to take to get there. And the GPS itself doesn't care, but it's just going to respond according to your intention, which you programmed into the system.
Gotcha.
Right. And never says, I told you to turn right.
Well, exactly. And sometimes I jokingly say maybe they should put your mother's voice in
That's right.
those, but no offense to mothers. I'm just joking. Right. But that's that's really what the practice is about. It's like if I'm 1% aware, what can I do to become 2% aware? If I'm 90% aware, how can I become 91% aware? And that's
I really appreciate that in the book you wrote about how to practice this. Not just to understand it, but actually practice it. Mm-hmm. And as I recall, the first 5 practices you called core practices.
Yes.
And they're about what? About relationship with self and others?
Yes, they're called core practices because they're really, my intention is that we practice these all the time and that they really form the foundation for the second 5 practices. And the first 2 practices, self-awareness and self-acceptance, of course, relate to oneself. The last 2 practices, universal, that is practice number 4 and 5, universal benevolence and compassionate communication, involve our relationship with others. And then the third one, unlimited forgiveness, works both ways. It works both towards ourselves and towards others. So there's kind of a whole package there in terms of relating to oneself and relating to others. And so the awareness is the foundation, and then from the awareness proceeds the acceptance. That's the second practice. And then once there's awareness and acceptance, then we go into the process of forgiveness. And then from forgiveness, we cultivate benevolence, which is appreciation, kindness, and generosity. That's what I call benevolence in the general sense. And then the last practice is compassionate communication, which involves compassionate speech and compassionate listening.
Robert, before Ellen asks you her next question she's got here, I wanted to actually mention to our listeners that when you buy this book, and you will, either through unity.org or Amazon, or even download it on Kindle, what's very cool is that each chapter is set up in a way that it describes what the practice is. It describes how to do it. It also tells you what pitfalls you might run into as you're trying to practice. And it also encourages you to not just practice by yourself, but to take it out into the world and apply it. Right, Robert?
Correct. That's it. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then, are there guided meditations that go with the book?
There are. At the end of each chapter, there's a URL given where you can log on and listen to a guided meditation relevant to that particular practice, that particular chapter.
Oh, don't you just love technology?
Well, it's really interesting because we were talking, I was talking with some of the folks here at Unity about e-books and the future of publishing, which, as you know, is changing rapidly. Right. And so the idea came that this particular book might be a bridge between paper books and electronic books, and it consists of a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm. So you can read and then you can listen and meditate, go into practice yourself.
Exactly.
So, Robert, now we're going to, if we can, begin to shift a little bit toward Ellen's second face of God concerns, the I-thou relationship. And I wanted to talk for a few minutes about what you wrote in your book about surrender. How are you defining surrender? Who do we surrender to? And does this have anything to do with the second face of God, the I-thou relationship?
Well, it can relate to the second face of God in the sense that we may see God as the beloved and we surrender to the beloved. That's one way. And in some Eastern traditions, for example, Hinduism in particular, there's the bhakti practice of surrendering to the guru, the guru being the embodiment of the divine, and so as you surrender to the divine by surrendering to your guru, your teacher. So there can be surrender in that second person aspect, but even in the first person aspect, surrender can be simply non-resistance to life itself. Just surrendering to life, just surrendering into the moment.
Surrendering to the truth of who you are? Is that what you're saying?
In each moment. And so there isn't another person or another being that we're surrendering to. We're simply non-resisting whatever is here. So surrender...
Did we lose Ellen?
I'm back.
Yeah,
okay.
Surrender can be synonymous with non-resistance.
So, Karen, I think you said, maybe it was in the very first show, that Ken Wilber refers to something he calls boomeritis, which is a whole generation's refusal to surrender.
Well, yeah, that's why he says they spend so much time in. They like the third face, and we like the first face and the third face, but not the second face. That the boomers have, because then if we don't look at the second face, then we have nothing we have to surrender to. Yes, that's right. Wilbur wrote that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to have to take us to break again, but we will be right back with our guest, Robert Brumet, and more discussion about how we can live originally and practice these three faces of God.
Have you asked your soul what it wants? Or are you so busy meeting the needs of everyone else? Family, friends, children, bosses, that you haven't checked in with the part of you that matters most? Janet Connor asked this question and received an answer. Your soul wants 5 things. That's it. 5 things. Your soul wants to connect with Source, commit to values, serve a purpose, express itself creatively, and last, it longs to create a beautiful, abundant life. Janet Connor teaches 5 wisdom habits that meet those needs. You can take each course separately or register for the complete Your Soul Wants 5 Things series and receive $1,000 in bonuses for free. Visit janetconnor.com and explore all 5 courses in her signature series, Your Soul Wants 5 Things. Your soul will thank you.
At the base of all life is the infinite wellspring of Source, and each of us has a unique way of expressing that Source as an individualized soul. Do you enjoy the company of inspiring people who are living on purpose? Do you want to live joyfully attuned to your own unique soul expression? Host Reverend Kristen Powell welcomes you to join the gathering of souls who live this way. You'll meet artists, naturalists, and other soulful expressions that will inspire you to call forth the most alive, passionate version of yourself. Get into the natural stream of your own soul by tuning into Soul Stream live every Wednesday at noon Central Time on Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
You're tuned in to the 3 Faces of God. Here are your hosts, Karen Kelly and Ellen Debenport.
We are back, and we're with our guest, the Reverend Robert Brumet, who's on the faculty at Unity Institute and has become quite a prolific author. So let me tell you first, you can get his book, Living Originally, at unity.org or on Amazon. And you can contact us, and of course we continue to be interested in your questions and comments about the 3 faces. So there are 2 basic ways. One is the Facebook page, which is called 3 Faces of God. But you can also send an email that'll come just to Karen and me. It's the 3 Faces of God at unityonlineradio.org. It's really long, but that'll get directly to us. And so we have been hearing from you all both ways. And even if you're listening to these recordings later, I think those contacts will still be active and we'll still be around. So we would love to keep this conversation going.
And actually it'd be a really good time to do that now, because in our next show we will be actually pulling some of your questions and some of your comments into the show and making sure that
from listeners. From listeners,
yes. Listeners, yeah. So are we ready to go get back into things?
Let's
go. Okay. Yeah. Well, Robert, still on the second phase question, we've been talking about meditation as the important practice to help us connect with our inner Christ. Let's talk about prayer now, the way that we communicate in the second phase of God, the I-thou relationship. In fact, there's really a bigger question here. If we were beaten up and bruised by the second phase of God relationship earlier in our religious life, can't we just ignore it altogether? I mean, can we live, if we can't, how can we live with a healthy second phase relationship? Can prayer help us do that?
Well, yes, there's actually a couple of responses I have, and one of them is that I don't think we were really beaten up by the second phase relationship as much as it is the negative expression of the third phase relationship, because when we were taught about God, we were taught about God. You know, it wasn't God. It wasn't God Himself showed up and turned us off. It was some teacher or clergy person that told us that God was bad, and
That's true.
That really wasn't necessarily our experience of God. You know, so it wasn't like we met God and didn't like Him. It was, which would be the second phase. You know, it was more that we heard rumors about God, and so we became afraid of Him or her or whatever you want to call it. So yeah.
Okay.
So I think the second for me, and I assume this is true for other people, but I'll just speak for myself. For me, it's the second face of God that opens my heart, and it's kind of like falling in love. You know, I think in our culture, falling in love, romance, has kind of replaced that second face relationship with God, and so we fall in love with someone and we make them our God. You know, and so. I think that's one of the reasons why we're so, in our culture, kind of addicted to romance, and you know, it's almost like Ram Dass says that you know, romantic relationships are the yoga of the West. You know, it's sort of our way of our spiritual practice vicariously played out.
It's how we experience the divine.
Wow. Exactly, yeah. It's vicariously through another person, and that's why that's why it's so powerful. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of healing that can take place, and a lot of heart opening, and a lot of richness that we can find in that second phase experience.
A lot of times in relationships, we then depend on our other for all of our needs, to fulfill all our needs, and then we're disappointed. And we've really misplaced our dependence, haven't we?
Well, exactly. And that begins early on, because the other is our mother. And so the mother becomes God, and we relate to her as if she were God. And then that gets projected onto someone else later on in our life. And so, so we have the expectations that only God could provide, and when we put that on another human being, we're going to be disappointed at the least.
But I'm always struck by reading the mystics like Rumi. They're describing God as it sounds like a very romantic relationship with the beloved.
Yes, the Sufis are very second person oriented in their relationship with God, and they'll also talk about God in the first person and third person, but the second face in particular is very alive and well in Sufism, and as well as in Christian contemplative prayer. That some of the mystics will write about God in a very personal way.
I like your use of the word beloved, and I've read a lot of Rumi too, and actually in my prayer practice, not all that long ago, I used that term. I use that term now. I use that actual word in my head and in my words out loud, because it does soften it. It puts everything in perspective. I really like that a lot.
Yes.
But, okay, so let me just belabor this a little bit, because we actually got an email from a listener about this very thing, that we thought Unity was telling us you don't have a relationship with God anymore. You are the divine in expression. What else could you be if God is all there is? The first two principles. But if you try to have a relationship, then you're placing God outside yourself, and that's a no-no. I know there's not a question in that, but I think that's been a point of confusion for a lot of people.
I think what's happened, Ellen, is that Unity arose in response to the belief that God was only outside of ourselves, which is what many of us were taught when we were younger, and which was the norm, I think, for our culture up until the 60s or 70s or 80s, when that began to shift a little bit. But the belief was that that to even consider God as in the first person would be nigh on heresy and perhaps even very dangerous to one's health and well-being. And so I think there's a response to that, and Unity and New Thought in general is a response to that, and it's a very healing response and an appropriate response. But it's also important that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and to recognize that to say God is other doesn't necessarily mean that God is not also self in the first or third person. When we address one face of God, we don't throw out the other two. They're not mutually exclusive.
Right. And when we read Unity's founders, and next week's show is about that. It's about Unity's founders. I see all three faces. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore had no problem talking to God.
Right. If you look at the Unity prayers, you'll see second and third face both in that.
I think it's important to remember, we brought this up in another show, that these are vehicles for us. The God as principle doesn't change here. These are tools for us to understand and embrace and deepen our relationship and experience of the divine and as the divine. And, none of them can be wrong, because, and they certainly, we can't be wrong about our reaching out and trying to have a contact and a relationship with our God. And these are just three different ways to do it. But I remember you saying one time, Robert, I heard you say, that when you get deeply into your practice, when you're envisioning the third face, you are envisioning the second face and the third face all at once, that they are really the one and the same.
Ultimately, yes. I mean, it just becomes a matter of how we're sharing with another person and how we're relating. And so, all of this is simply about the fact that as human beings, we frame reality as an I or a you or an it. And I was just thinking of the invocation.
The Charles Fillmore
invocation. Yeah, it's interesting. It starts out, we are now in the presence of pure being, where that's a third person reference to God. And then later on in that prayer, he says, we acknowledge thy presence and thy power, O blessed Spirit. See, and that's a second person relationship. He's talking to God, not about God.
Right.
And so in the Unity prayers, I think we see a lot of that second and third reference, as well as the first person reference.
Because that same blessing from Fillmore uses the word immersed. Immersed in being, and that's the first face, right? Knowing our oneness.
Yeah, as we experience it, that's the first phase. Exactly. When we're talking about it, that's the third phase.
Wow.
Right. As soon as you talk about it, you've switched to the third phase.
Exactly.
That's one of my takeaways from today.
That's it.
I can't believe this.
We always run out of time. I know.
Oh, wow. So this has been so
Be sure to... So first of all, thank you very much, Robert. This has been wonderful. We knew it would be.
You're very, very welcome, and thank you for the invitation. I've enjoyed this very much.
Oh, me too.
Next week's show, our guest is Mark Hicks, who is the founder of truthunity.net, which is a website you all should check out. It has a whole lot from Unity's founders, including recordings of them. And we'll talk with him about how the founders and some of Unity's early thinkers thought and expressed all three faces of God. So until then, many blessings.
Many blessings.
Thanks for listening to The Three Faces of God with Karen Kelly and Reverend Ellen Davenport. This is a 6-week special series about understanding the divine in different ways. This program is brought to you in part by EllenDavenport.com and by Unity of Wimberley, Texas, online at unityofwimberley.com.
Have you heard about Dr. Tom Shepard's new program on Unity Online Radio?
Tom Shepard, isn't he the Unity Magazine question and answer guy?
Right. Well, they've actually turned him loose with a radio show, and I hear it's going to be pretty edgy.
Edgy? Like what?
Guest panelists and students from Unity Institute and Seminary. Topics like abortion, gay marriage, war and peace, environmental issues, Islamic fundamentalism, universal health care, religion and politics, current events.
Yeah, but they'll all be Unity people, right?
Dr. Tom and his students will talk about the hard questions facing all people today, sometimes joined by rabbis, priests, liberal and conservative ministers, Buddhist monks, Baha'is, Hindus.
And he's going to interview them on the program?
Better, he's going to introduce a controversial topic and let students and special guests go for it.
This could get explosive. Does he have guys in black shirts standing by to break up the fights?
If I know Dr. Tom, he will keep it both friendly and spirited.
Whoa, I gotta hear this. When and where?
The program is called Let's Talk About It, and it's on every Thursday at 9 a.m. Central Time, only on Unity Online Radio. So let's talk about it.
Definitely, let's.
Inspiration only takes a moment. We invite you to consider these words from Unity author Charles Roth. Live deeply in the present moment. If you are going to work on the premise that real energy, real excitement, that feeling of being fully and enthusiastically alive comes from a source within you, then it follows that you have to spend some time getting acquainted, being at home in those far reaches of inner space. Peace is power, for out of stillness, strength is born, and out of inner harmony, productivity flourishes. Rest in that inner peace.
This meditative moment is brought to you by Unity.
Spirituality into your own hands? Bucking corporate religion in favor of finding your own path? Do you cross the boundary between religion and science? Or between religions themselves? Do you like a dose of humor with your truth-seeking? If you answered yes, you're what we call a holy rascal. Join Rabbi Rami Shapiro for How to Be a Holy Rascal, Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Central. Rami and his guests will engage in lively, humorous discussions about what it means to be a spiritual human being in the 21st century. How to Be a Holy Rascal, Wednesdays at 11 a.m., only on Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.